Okay, so you might have heard that Hytale's been reacquired by the original creators after Riot canned the project, who immediately tossed out the last 4 years of work and reverted to an old engine, have pledged to fund the game's development for at least 10 years on their own, and are releasing their first early access version just over a month from now. A lot of people have been pretty reasonably critiquing their most recent FAQ post about the state of the game, particularly their argument against publishing on Steam being that they don't want to deal with negative criticism, which is definitely an interesting motivation. But I've been following their posts since the reacquisition, and what if I tell you that's actually the least concerning part about the project? My name is Ari, and I've been a hobbyist voxel engine developer for 7 years. I'm also currently working full-time to build Stardust Frontier, a roguelike party mecha game, wishlist on Steam. And I have a lot to say about Hytale. First, let me indulge in a brief stipulation. Hytale has by far come the closest out of any voxel game to rivaling Minecraft's hype, and a lot of people are very invested in its success. I suspect I'll get some degree of hate regardless of what I say here, but I want to make it very clear that I do not want Hytale to fail, and I'm not trying to poke undue holes in it or its creators, but the game developer in me sees some of the decisions that they're making and gets worried. As far as I'm concerned, the fact that they're going to be taking pre-orders for the game in less than a week allows me to express some well-reasoned criticism. I'm going to be voicing my honest concerns based on my years of experience, as well as how I would resolve them if I were at the wheel. But enough towing the line, let's get started. So, Hytale's been silent for the better part of 6 months after Riot Games, who acquired the team in 2020, officially shelved the project. Then, this November, the original founder of the project, Simon Collins-Laflamme, reacquired the game for some amount that was not publicly disclosed, though he had previously stated that he would spend up to $25 million to buy and finish the game. Since then, he's rehired over 40 original team members and fully resumed development on a 4-year-old branch of the project that was their most feature-complete build before an apparently disastrous engine rewrite that tanked the entire project. Since the game's announcement in 2018, Hytale's been an intense topic of interest amongst the Minecraft community and surrounding spaces, largely due to its lofty claims of having much more involved gameplay, an officially supported modding API, and an experienced team behind it who have successfully run the Hypixel server for over a decade. Basically, everything that Minecraft lacks. I myself remember seeing the project's initial unveiling and subsequent progress updates before the Riot acquisition, and not so quietly cursing the fact that they were basically doing everything I wanted to do with my engine and more. Unfortunately, as so often happens in huge projects like these, scope creep and tech debt started to pile up, eventually resulting in the team making the decision to completely scrap their Java-based engine to begin work on a multi-platform C++ one instead, which appears to have been the ultimate reason for the project's cancellation. Simon has been very vocal about this mistake since reacquiring the project, and the team has decided to completely drop the new engine and instead focus on the much more feature-complete Java version. This video will mainly focus on 3 aspects of Hytale's relaunch, and my concerns for the project as it approaches its pre-order date: the architecture of the engine and how their modding ambitions don't really add up anymore, the lack of core gameplay and weird messaging about community content, and some seriously strange decisions with regards to pre-ordering and monetization. These issues may sound disparate, but when taken together, they paint a pretty concerning picture. Let's talk about it. Before we dig into what Hytale is doing wrong, we need to explain what they were trying to do right that got players so excited. Hytale is very transparently a Minecraft competitor, and before the acquisition, they publicized a lot of decisions that highlighted the limitations of Minecraft and what they wanted to do better. Minecraft has sustained itself for over a decade in no small part due to its massive modding scene, and so naturally Hytale wanted to evolve that space significantly. First, let's quickly go over some definitions so that we're all on the same page. Code mods and script mods. A mod is a community-made modification to a game that adds new content or functionality. Minecraft has a massive modding scene, adding everything from new enemies to item transmutation to massive factory automation. There are lots of ways to write mods for different games, but they broadly fit into 2 categories: code mods and script mods. Code mods are bits of code that get injected into the game itself to change its behavior or add new content. They have full control over the game and are super powerful, but there's also a trade-off. Since they have the full privileges of the game that they've modified, they can execute malicious code if they want, making them inherently unsafe. They can also conflict with each other if they both modify the same parts of the codebase, and they tend to break whenever the underlying game updates or changes, since they're directly patching their own logic on top of it. Minecraft is exclusively modded using code mods, which is why mods have to be updated every game version. Script mods, on the other hand, are a lot safer, as instead of manipulating the game itself, they use hooks provided by the game to register content, react to events, and run their own logic. These hooks collectively are called an API. Script mods are usually written in a different language to the game itself, which can be sandboxed, meaning that code ran in it cannot harm the user's computer. But it also means that script mods are only as powerful as the game creators allow them to be. However, a well-designed modding API can effectively cover the breadth of a game's features, allowing script mods to access pretty much everything a code mod could. In Hytale and Minecraft, source mods are written in Java, so we'll call them Java mods for the remainder of this video. And when talking about script mods, we'll be calling them Lua mods, as Lua is the scripting language that Hytale was, spoiler, previously going to be using for their game. Client and server. Multiplayer games have two different parts to them: the client, which runs on a user's computer, and the server, which is the authoritative source for the world and the game's state, and usually exists in the cloud somewhere for the client to connect to. Most players are used to the idea of servers only existing in multiplayer, but in Hytale and a lot of other sandbox games, a server is actually created even in single player for the local machine to connect to. This basically means that even while playing single player, you're effectively just connecting to a multiplayer server with only one player. This is useful to note because we'll be talking a lot about server-side and client-side mods in this video, which refers to what part of the game is being modified. So it's relevant to note that server-side mods can still run even in a single player game. Okay, so now that we've got the definitions out of the way, let's talk about what Hytale is doing. So before the Riot acquisition, they planned to create an official Lua scripting API for their game and have all mods be Lua mods. Mods were going to be able to be beamed from the server directly to the client, allowing servers to create new interactions, UIs, and behaviors that can run directly on the user's machine. This is super similar to what I've been building in my own engine for the last 7 years, and while I'm a little biased, I believe this is the best, most powerful way to support mods in a voxel game. It's also been proven by a lot of existing popular games, like Garry's Mod. However, since the reacquisition, Hytale has heavily stepped back from these plans, and in their outline for how they're planning on supporting mods in the current version of the engine, there's a lot of red flags. Let's start with the biggest issue. Mods are only server-side. Put simply, that means that all custom interactions defined by mods must operate on the server, which means they're all ping-dependent. If your buddy has a server in Australia and a mod that lets you double jump, prepare to have that action happen 300 milliseconds later than when you press the button. And not just that, any interaction that isn't specifically derived from the existing behaviors in the game will have no client-side prediction, which is where the client guesses how the server is going to respond to an action to reduce the perceived latency, which means that everything modded is going to feel weirdly sluggish. How can I say that? Because this has already been done. We already know exactly how this turns out because 2 separate voxel games before this have tried this exact strategy and it doesn't really work. Minecraft has done this with plugins, which are effectively Java mods that only run on the server and are largely used for minigame servers to create custom games without requiring the players to download a custom client. This can work well if the game is designed around it, but any interaction that requires an immediate response, such as custom movement, gets super flaky as soon as your ping becomes even remotely unstable. The other example is Minetest, also known now as Luanti, which builds its entire modding API around server-side scripting, meaning that practically no logic runs on the client. This works seamlessly on single player, but as soon as you join a server, it becomes even worse than Minecraft plugins, as practically every single interaction, from breaking a block to get its item, to right-clicking a crafting table, to hitting an enemy, requires a round trip to the server to figure out what just happened. But why, you might ask, would Hytale make their mods server-side only? What's the drawback of sending script mods to the client if they're sandboxed in Lua? Well, that's the thing. They scrapped that too. They've completely dropped Lua scripting from their plans and are now only supporting Java mods on the server for creating modded content. That means we're effectively back to Minecraft plugins, where logic running on the server is unsandboxed, untrusted, and can't dispatch anything to the client beyond static assets and resources. It also means that unless they specifically invest the time to make a Java modding API for the server, which frankly just doesn't make sense to me, as if that was their plan, they could have just put that energy into making a Lua modding API for far less effort, mods will also break every time the underlying server code changes. And for an early access game like Hytale that'll likely be getting rapid updates, you should expect that to happen pretty frequently. In their first article after recovering the project, Simon mentions how mindful they want to be about mod backwards compatibility, but frankly, with this decision, I don't see how that can be anything more than just words. The rationale provided for these decisions really stuck out to me, as it doesn't really make any sense from a technical perspective. Their argument for dropping Lua scripting was supposedly because they didn't want to have to maintain 2 half-baked modding languages, being Java and Lua. Which, yeah, why would you want to maintain 2 different modding APIs for your game? But they shouldn't have to. A well-designed Lua API should make supporting Java mods as a whole unnecessary. And as I mentioned already, the work that would go into making a stable Java API would be greater than the work that would go into making a stable Lua API. And Lua comes with all the other benefits of a sandbox language, like the ability to send mod code over the network. But instead of addressing these points, they move straight on to their solution, which is to include blueprint modding in the game instead? As opposed to both source mods and script mods, which are written in code, some engines like Unreal or Scratch have users define logic by dragging nodes together visually. This is called blueprint modding. Some modders really like them, and most don't. They can be a lot easier for designers to get started with, I guess, but they have a lower complexity ceiling and are a lot harder to scale when designing more complicated behaviors. Programmers also tend to not like them as much, as they've spent a lot of time and energy creating really nice tooling for writing code that can't be translated to a proprietary node editor. Now, if maintaining 2 code APIs was too much work, I can't imagine how maintaining a code API and an entire set of graphical tooling for the blueprint system is any better. Their arguments for blueprint modding in general are just kind of hard to track, as they're mostly just arguing the opposite side of the critiques that they gave for Lua scripting. For example, they mention that they don't want to fragment logic across multiple half languages when talking about Lua, but then when talking about blueprints, they describe how they can be used by designers while allowing programmers to remain in code. This is literally just 2 languages with extra steps. The only other reason I could see for having a blueprint-based modding API in addition to Java mods is if they were going to use the blueprint API for client-side logic. I still consider this a strange compromise, as they could achieve the same thing far easier by having Lua on both sides, but this isn't even what they're going for either. In their post, they describe how blueprints can be augmented by Java modders by adding new nodes to use, which would only be possible if the blueprints ran in the same environment as Java mods, which is on the server side again. I just don't see a reason for any of the decisions they're making. It feels like they're intentionally shooting themselves in the foot by relying on Java modding instead of creating a modding API, as they'll be making a more brittle, prone to error, and limited system for integrating community content. Not to mention that by relying on source mods, they permanently lock themselves out of ever publishing on mobile or consoles, as that sort of unsandbox modding is strictly forbidden on those platforms due to security concerns. They have stated that mobile and console aren't on the roadmap right now, but they're planning for other platforms, which likely include them, much later. But if they continue down this path, they permanently lock themselves out of those options, with no way to get on them in the future. This is one of the things I've noticed a lot while digging through their articles. Their team doesn't really seem to be on the same page when it comes to the scope and direction of the project. This is noticeable quite often in the subtext of their articles, which seem to change tune pretty heavily depending on who's writing them, but I think the most obvious example is this answer in their FAQ, written only a week or so after the modding post. The question is about paid cosmetics, but I want to highlight the specific section about community-made cosmetics, where they specifically write, modders can still create visual mods such as furniture, pets, hats, and avatar cosmetics. As these aren't official content of the game, any player who wants to see these cosmetics needs to have the mod installed. Which to me reads as though someone hasn't gotten the memo that, quote, they don't intend to support any client mods with the aim of, quote, avoiding a fragmented ecosystem. We'll get back to the issues with messaging later, but before we move on from modding, I think it's really important to talk about why people mod games and what Hytale's missing from that equation. Hytale has made it really clear that they want a mature modding scene at launch. Despite the lackluster modding framework they've committed to, they've repeatedly affirmed their dedication towards making Hytale a powerful modding platform, and have said multiple times how pivotal modding will be while their early access is still being fleshed out. But people don't mod games for no reason. Modders add content to games that they're most passionate about, that draw them in due to a strong core offering and offer ample space for expansion. Modding isn't an inevitability or a guarantee. A game needs to offer something at the beginning to draw in that interest. Hytale's Adventure Mode, which I understand to be the progression-focused game mode they've been showing off in the past, is apparently going to be entirely absent at launch, with only Creative Mode and Exploration Mode, which seems to be more of a free sandbox present. Their articles don't present a timeline for when Adventure Mode is to be expected, but given that they say the game will be in early access for at least a few years, I wouldn't be surprised if it still has a ways to go yet. So, looking at the game as a potential modder, what does it have that would make it engaging to create new content around? Hytale's made a point to showcase its combat systems and enemies. You could try adding new weaponry or equipment, but with the aforementioned server-side modding, I'm not sure how possible it would be to create new types of weaponry while maintaining a decent game feel, since all interactions would be ping-dependent. To be fair though, those issues might affect first-party content as well. It's not been lost on me that all the combat footage we've seen since the reacquisition have been in single-player, where there would be no latency between the internal server and the client. You could create new enemy types to fight, although it sounds like entities are largely data-driven instead of being scripted, which makes me uncertain how much uniqueness could be added to modded entities beyond just choosing a pre-programmed AI and setting the stats. You could add more dungeons to explore, maybe new biomes to travel through, but without the larger game structure, it would be hard to fit them into existing content in a rewarding way, especially given how early access the game is, and the fact that updates that ruffle the existing progression will likely be pushed out pretty regularly. Even still, none of this content breaks new ground compared to the likes of Minecraft mods, and when comparing between the two, Hytale offers little incentive to mod for its heavily unfinished game when Minecraft has a much more mature and populated modding scene already. And the technical incentives to mod Hytale instead of Minecraft have, as we've already discussed, all largely been rolled back, so any arguments for modding Hytale based on the idea that it'll be better to mod than Minecraft also largely don't apply. Beyond the technical specs, sure, some things in Hytale certainly look more polished than vanilla Minecraft as of now. The model fidelity, the effects when attacking, and their combat system all look quite nice. But I've looked over the technical details they've shared, and as far as voxel engines go, the game is pretty modest. They've kept a lot of the details close to their chest, but in a recent article they revealed the minimum and recommended specs for the game, which allows me to do a little inference. For one, they're only targeting a render distance slightly above Minecraft's default range of 16 chunks, and while they don't state a maximum distance, the highest they benchmark in their article is 32 chunks. The wording they use throughout the article also makes it clear that they're not using a cubic chunk system, meaning the game will have a fixed, likely modest world height. While it has a couple graphical flares that vanilla Minecraft doesn't, mainly the bloom and the god rays, which do admittedly look quite nice in the trailer, it's not breaking new ground compared to the vast amounts of community Minecraft shaders, and given that they're disallowing client mods, it sounds like shader packs will forever be off the table for Hytale. And I know some of you might not think it's fair to compare base Hytale with modded Minecraft graphically, but try to remember I'm talking about the limits of these engines when handed to an experienced modder, and Hytale's constraints work directly against it in that matter. To substitute for the heavily unfinished core game, Hytale seems to be leveraging their game as a platform and bringing back fan-favorite games from the Hypixel minigame server in an attempt to pull in an audience from there. In fact, a lot of examples they've given about their modding API seem to be more oriented towards the idea of creating unique, distinct mini-games in their engine rather than adding more content to their existing game. But it's important to note that modding a game and creating mini-games within it are two fundamentally different experiences and draw in different demographics of people. The core audience of modders that Hytale's trying to appeal to are the people that want to build off a game and create more content in its framework, whereas their development push and messaging seems to be directed much more towards mini-game creators instead. These two audiences are not the same and largely don't overlap. And the same can be said for the audiences of these experiences as well. Demographically, players that play minigame servers are going to be younger, seek more instant gratification, and enjoy shorter-form content that's not really in line with Hytale's main gameplay loop. These users will certainly want more variety and content in the games that they play, but developing more compelling experiences for them doesn't do much to draw attention back to the primary product. The experiences they enjoy aren't additive to the core game, they're separate. And it bears repeating that if people want to develop for that niche, there are much more mature spaces to do so, like Minecraft or Roblox or even Fortnite. Minecraft hit the jackpot of dozens of intersecting and independent player types largely because it was the first to do what it did. Content creators took note, which only propelled it even further across the net until everybody knew the game. But Hytale won't strike that same goldmine because fundamentally it's not doing anything new. Sure, Hytale might eventually become a really good game, but even if it does, it's not like it's doing something that's never been done before. Sure, they'll have an influx of players from the people who've waited nearly a decade for the game to come out, and they'll likely translate a lot of their Minecraft server audience over to the game as well, but both of those groups are going to want conflicting things from the game, and neither are likely to be satisfied by the offerings at launch. This fragmentation of their audience is going to make it incredibly hard to maintain both of their attentions, as developing the core game does little to appeal to the minigame players, and developing more minigame content does little for the core audience. Beyond that, their game just simply isn't designed to be used as a platform. Their API might bear the most similarity to Minecraft plugins, but that's not a positive indicator for its use. Minecraft plugins evolved organically, augmenting the parts of the game that were possible to be modified without breaking compatibility with vanilla clients. And that's also where a lot of their limitations come from. With Hytale, I see a lot of the same. Shackling programmatic logic to the server side heavily restricts what kind of changes you can make to things like the player's movement and control set. And when creating a new engine that's built for these types of experiences, I feel a lot more effort should go into designing the API to be appropriate for making that sort of content. The Hypixel team is surely aware of the limitations they've had to deal with when creating Minecraft minigames, so I'm surprised they're not a lot more motivated to push against those boundaries when creating their own engine. The game is also, frankly, missing out on a lot of performance that could be gained from a C++ client, which is what Hytale's abandoned new client was. I mean, just look at Minecraft Java versus Bedrock Edition. Putting aside differences in monetization philosophy and the layer of grunge that covers Bedrock's features, its performance laps Java Edition because of the lower language overhead of C++ and their ability to micro-optimize important parts of the game further than Java would allow. Now, of course, perfect is the enemy of good. Dogmatically sticking to building only the most optimal, most powerful engine is largely what got Hytale into development hell in the first place, and it's likely that in the future they will optimize the game further and it will run better than Minecraft. It's not a high bar. But it would be ignorant to disregard the fact that they do have very stiff competition. They are literally competing with the most successful video game in history, and leaving a more optimized engine at the door is not a great starting point, especially when doing so limits their future growth into their primary demographic, which is far less likely to have a capable gaming PC than an iPhone or tablet. I have to imagine they're aware of this, which is why they've been pushing so hard to try to make the game appealing to core modders in their articles. But beyond words, they haven't really put in the legwork engine side to make Hytale compelling to mod, and there's not enough interesting content to riff off of either. And experienced modders will know this once they get their hands on the game or hear from others who have. Which leaves me with a difficult question. Why don't the devs? Because here's what I fear. I fear the Hytale team knows that the content that they're offering on release isn't satisfactory. They know their game isn't there yet, but they're relying on a modding scene like Minecraft's to keep them afloat. Because why else would they push so hard to convince modders to get in on the ground floor, make such a huge PR effort about how important it is to the game if they didn't need it? I'm worried that they're convinced that if they release now, modders will come, because that's definitely the message that they're sending their audience. If Hytale wants a mature modding scene beyond independent minigames, they need to focus a lot harder on expanding the modding platform's capabilities and improving the engine to house that content. And they need to give the game a bit more time in the oven to develop the official experience we know they want to make so that modders can have something that they want to add content to. And if that isn't their goal, if I've heavily misread and creating a casual minigame sandbox is their primary ambition, they need to be really careful in changing up their messaging to make that clear, or they're going to end up with a lot of disappointed players on launch. Because games do not survive off of mods. They never have, especially not immediately after release. Mods are made by passionate players of a game that has proven to be worth their attention and time, not by people hyped up about a game that's still just barely out the door. So why rush it out the door? Hopefully, I've painted a compelling picture of why I think Hytale needs more time to cook. The underdeveloped modding API is intrinsically limited in a way that can't be papered over later, the game lacks content and polish which will take a while longer to solidify, and the conflicting messaging between modders and the player base leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to clarity of direction. These issues could all be fixed though if they afforded themselves a bit more time to sort things out and didn't rush the game out the door less than 2 months after getting it back. Which begs the question, why are they releasing it now, instead of spending another season or two polishing the release? Simon has said he doesn't want fans to have to wait any longer, but first impressions of a game are super important both for the players and for the media. Ultimately, after waiting nearly a decade, another half year wouldn't destroy the universe, especially when more time after reacquiring the game would mean more time to tease out more features, to give content creators early access, and to smooth out all of the rough edges so the first playable version has fewer problems. And given that Simon's committed to self-funding the game without investment or publishing for 10 years, I don't see why they're in such a hurry. I get the rationale of not waiting forever, but even for an indie sandbox game, this seems incredibly rushed. So here's my honest feeling about this whole thing. And I recognize this is the most speculative part of this video, but I feel really strongly about it. I don't think they have that 10 years of funding, not even close. Let's break it down. Before actually making the deal to acquire the game for an undisclosed amount, Simon said he'd offer up to $25 million to reacquire and finish the game. That's not just money for the property, but also the budget he'd have to finish it. We don't know how much he ended up buying it for, but we can safely assume it's below that amount. But even if it cost him $0 to get the game back, the size of his team still just doesn't make sense. Since reacquiring Hytale, Simon has rehired over 40 of the original members of the development team. The median game developer salary in the US is $115,000 a year. Rounding that down to $100,000 to make the math a bit easier, a team of 40 would still require $4 million annually for working capital, and that's disregarding marketing, licensing, contracting, server hosting, paying for tooling, and all the other money sinks that running a game dev studio requires. I would know, I've been dealing with all that nonsense myself recently. So if the team costs at least $4 million a year to operate, and Simon's committed to 10 years of operation, that's already $40 million, and that's on top of however much it costs to repurchase the IP from Riot Games. And we can see hints of financial strain peeking through in other areas of their messaging as well. The initial sale of the game is going to come in 3 bundles, the lowest at $20 USD and the highest at $70 for the Cursebreaker edition. The only difference between these bundles are cosmetics, or at least that's what the FAQ implies, but I will note it's pretty vague on that topic, and it never actually says what'll be in the higher pre-order versions, only that you can get special avatar cosmetics through the early access editions. Also a weird nit, but I found the wording here kind of weird. Describing cosmetics as, quote, fair and balanced instead of cosmetic is sorta dodgy, and while it might just be strange wording, it makes my stomach drop just a little. But back to the point, there being a $50 difference between the lowest and highest bundle, presumably just for cosmetics, definitely implies that if they do add paid cosmetics in the future, they'll likely be a lot closer to Fortnite pricing than an actual microtransaction, and they're definitely keeping the door open, as they've said. Another element of note is that Hytale is fully prepared to allow mod and server monetization and is looking to take a cut for itself after 2 years. They're withholding specific information about the percentage until the date that they choose to implement it, but they've said that it may be up to 20%, though they'd prefer to keep it lower. It's worth noting that while Minecraft doesn't allow monetizing mods, they do allow server monetization, and they take no cut from the servers that choose to do so. While I understand that servers require money to operate, I believe that allowing modders to create paywalled content and sell it in-game harms the open culture and ecosystem around modding, and creates a much less comfortable and more competitive space where instead of trying to create novel experiences, modders are inclined to create whatever sells best. The 2-year delay is notable. It's a genuinely positive gesture, at least given the context that they would otherwise be taking a cut, which I'd still take some issue with, but the date itself is interesting in that Hytale wants to start collecting additional income beyond game sales as early as 2 years from now. This again kind of indicates that they're maybe less confident about being able to turn a profit off of game sales alone. Simon said in a tweet that additional funding could scale up production of the game, but that he's funding the team with his own money and can afford to do so for many years. But many doesn't mean 10. I've searched around to see if he's actually asserted that he has the funding for 10 years of development, and I've not been able to find any confirmation. I also find it shocking that he would even be considering scaling up the team from here. He's already got 40 employees behind him, and I'm very familiar with the complexities of building out a voxel engine, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure what I would do with a team even the fraction of that size. There comes a point with a project where people begin stepping on each other's toes, or have to be assigned to work that realistically doesn't need to be pursued right now. Glancing at the entity list near the end of the survival mode video that's been playing in the background definitely gives me the opinion that they've got a lot of modelers on board. Do they really need this many entities at this stage of the project? Which brings me to the final, most concerning detail of this whole plan, and the thing that compelled me to write this video as a whole. What's with the month-long pre-purchase period? The Hytale website repeatedly notes there's no incentive to pre-order the game before launch, and the launch is only a month away, so why do it at all? There's no benefit to the purchaser, and if Hytale truly has 10 years of funding, they shouldn't need to be soliciting sales only a month after the reacquisition. It just doesn't add up. Pre-purchasing a game has historically been done when a game was distributed physically and stock might be limited. And then later, once things moved to digital, it was often done to have the game pre-downloaded onto the purchaser's system and playable the moment that it launches. Nowadays, it's sometimes used to upsell exclusive pre-order content and get ahead of any launch sales that might end up happening, but none of those apply to Hytale. The only remaining reason I can see for having a pre-purchase period is that they're worried that less people would choose to buy the game if reviews and feedback were already pouring in from day one buyers. And that's really not a good sign. As I alluded in the beginning of the video, this whole discourse online started as a response to Hytale's first FAQ where they stated they didn't want to have to over-index on negative reviews by publishing too quickly on Steam. Since then, they've gone in and reworded that response, saying that they aren't afraid of negative criticism, but that they don't want to be review-bombed by unsuspecting and uninformed buyers on Steam. As a game developer myself, I understand the impulse to shy away from viral platforms like Steam, whose reviews often define the perspective of a game and can be the first cited piece of information when forming an opinion about it. Developers of all sizes are often forced to make the tough decision to release earlier than they personally feel they're ready to, and risk backlash from largely uninformed and unempathetic strangers online. But Hytale, at least as they present themselves, are in the rare situation where they can determine their own release window almost without external pressure. Avoiding Steam is a half measure. With a game as viral and notable as Hytale, there will be no hiding from industry consensus. Not having a public store page with reviews won't protect them from YouTube, gaming journalism, or word of mouth, and nor should it. Asking for money for a game is a statement that you believe the game is worth what you're asking for, that you believe it fulfills your promise to the audience, and that you believe that it'll be a valuable addition to people's lives. If a developer believes their game meets that criteria, they should also have faith that other people will see it that way as well. In Hytale's case, people have been waiting for the game for nearly 10 years. Since its announcement, people have been pining for it to change the voxel game space. Those are a lot of expectations to meet, and I'm sure the weight of those expectations lay heavily on the entire team. And if they believe that those expectations are going to be let down, the right call would be to choose another avenue to move forwards. There are other ways to gain audience feedback on a pre-launch game. Public playtests, free demos, development live streams where interested players can get a first-hand look at what still has a ways to go. Ways that will be perceived a lot more positively than collecting money before even showing the product. These are experienced developers, supposedly with money to spare. They should know this. So given that they're continuing forwards regardless and maintaining the assumption that they're operating in good faith, I can only see this as a money issue. There's no reason to believe the game wouldn't sell as good or better if a more polished initial release occurred in 5 or 6 months. So the only reason I can see for releasing this early is that they need that money. A commitment to funding is not the same as having it in your pocket, and the expenses of rehiring the team and resuming development fully may have very well been higher than anybody expected. Early access is about clear communication, and I believe Hytale's been trying, but for as much as Simon tweets about how the game is unfinished, that everything's wrong with it, that it's early access for a reason, he and the team haven't really presented strong reasons for why they're moving forward anyways, haven't shown us the actual decision-making process behind the curtain, and I think that would go a long way. So, is Hytale screwed? I don't want to think so. Hundreds of thousands of Minecraft players have been anxiously awaiting it since its first announcement, and for a game to get a second chance like this is truly out of the ordinary. And as one of those people that was excited and mildly terrified about its announcement, I want it to succeed. And it's for that reason that I voice my concerns. I want Hytale to be the best game it can be, and sometimes that means putting a bit more thought into the architecture and development of the game before jumping into iterative public releases. If they continue with their current plans, they'll be making serious compromises to their future capabilities because of the choices they're making today. And I feel like their public communications leave a lot to be desired when it comes to explaining the trade-offs of their decisions with regards to the modding scene, and I worry it'll end up with a lot of disappointed players as a result. If Hytale, for some reason, was listening, I'd urge them to take a step back, delay the pre-purchase, and put a couple more months into their first release before sending it out into the market to make sure they've made the right decisions for the longevity of their game and are giving consumers an accurate picture of the state of it before release. I mean, hey, I can't imagine that any of the content creators anxiously waiting to get their hands on the game would pass it up if it was given to them just a few months later. For the audience, the people that are considering buying Hytale, I'm not here to tell you not to buy or support the game. Regardless of how things turn out, it's clear that there's a ton of passion and care going into the project, and I have no doubt it'll be something special. But given that there's no incentive to pre-purchasing, I'd say maybe give it a month. Wait until the first actual release to put down your money. The game clearly has a long way to go before it leaves early access, and you might find it rougher around the edges than you'd personally want to pledge your money to at launch. Of course, these are just the opinions of one, me, based on the information that I could scrap together and script in this last week. I've done my absolute best to make sure that what I've said here is reinforced by every piece of information I could find, but of course, there's always something I could have missed. If you've made it this far, I hope the opinions I've spoken and the evidence I've sourced have seemed reasonable, but if you're considering leaving an angry comment that I missed some Discord message the developer posted somewhere 5 weeks ago on their server, please just understand there's a limit to my researching range, especially given the pretty short notice I had to put this video together. Do you plan to play Hytale on release? Or more interestingly, do you plan to try and mod it? I'd love to hear what my audience plans to do with the game once it's out. I don't know if I'm going to be talking about Hytale again on this channel unless a super interesting development happens from somewhere. I have enough on my plate already with Stardust Frontier and Zephyr. But if you have plans or thoughts about the game, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Thank you for sticking around for what is officially my longest YouTube video yet. I hope it wasn't too draining. I've done my best to tighten the script as much as I can, despite the relatively little time I've had to put it together. I've got another video coming out really soon that's going to be a fair bit briefer, so hopefully that should be a bit of a return to form. Thank you so much to my patrons, BenRob0329, Butter, Charlotte, Cobalt Wolf, Dapper Core, Dave the Freak, Japio, LootC99, Sky, and Therum. And an extra special sparkly thanks to Archie and Zithia for subscribing to the Best Friends tier on my Patreon. Y'all are great. If you want to chat with me about voxels and game development, I have a Discord server linked in the description. I hope to see you there. That's all I have to say for this video though, so thanks for your time and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!